day 7. We left off yesterday talking about the Indian removal, the Chickasaws, Choctaws, the Creeks. They'll all be moved first, and then we're going to look at moving the Cherokees out next. And one of the things we talked about yesterday at the end was, hey, listen, Indians have been told the same thing for a long time. If you don't want to leave and you want to stay in your land, it's simple. You need to act like white people. You need to farm, you need to be Christians, you need to read and write the language, you need to do all those things. And more so than any other tribe, the Cherokee had done that. And in the end, it's ultimately not even going to matter, which is sort of a shame. I don't think that it ever would have mattered. And a lot of this has to do with money and greed. The cotton boom and potential of making money off of their land. But like I said, the Cherokees, more than anybody else, the Cherokees were assimilating. They were farming, they had plantations, they owned slaves, they were teaching children to read and write in English, and a lot of this stuff is in the notes. They had brought in missionaries, Christian missionaries, to help their kids, to help their tribes learn all these things. The Cherokees, and this is on the test by the way, the Cherokees even had an Indian named Sequoyah who's going to create a Cherokee alphabet. He's going to create letters and symbols, 86 of them, that represent every single syllable in the Cherokee language. And I'm not sure if you realize this, but it took civilizations thousands upon thousands of years to create an alphabet and a writing system that actually worked. And this guy's going to pull it off in a relatively short time in comparison to how long it took the world to do those things. They're going to publish their own newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix. Everything will be written in English and in Cherokee, which will allow everybody who is part of the Cherokee tribe, whether you know English or not, to read, to be informed, to know what's going on. They're going to create a government, and this is a little bit deep, I guess, for some of you maybe. Most of these tribes who get removed have signed multiple treaties with the United States government, and those treaties, they're all at one point or another given their sovereignty by the United States government. And if you're not sure what sovereignty is, sovereignty, when you're 18 years old, you'll become sovereign. You're your own ruler legally, according to United States law, and you can basically do what you want at that point, and you can't really be told by anybody else what to do as far as even your parents are concerned. And so, with the governments, the tribes of the Southeast, and with a lot of tribes, I guess, in a lot of cases, they've been granted their sovereignty by the United States government, which basically means the United States government has no control over them. Doesn't have any of their say. Even today, on the Indian reservations that have been created in an effort to repay these people for being removed from their land, the United States government, those Indian reservations are sovereign. The United States government law doesn't really apply to them. And so, it's the same thing with the Cherokees. The Cherokees actually are going to create their own government. They're going to write a constitution. They're going to have an election system. They're going to have a bicameral council, kind of like your legislature. They're going to have a court system. And all this stuff is modeled after the United States government. Like I said, they've been told for a long time, if you want to stay, you need to assimilate. And I'm not sure exactly what else they could have done. Of the civilized tribes, they're the most civilized. They'll elect a principal chief, essentially an executive, an Indian by the name of John Ross. And it's funny, and it may be hard to see on camera, but I'm going to show you a picture, and I'll probably make it big on your screen later. But when I usually show the picture of John Ross, the Indian chief in class, people go, that guy doesn't look like an Indian. He is. it's Indian heritage. And here's John Ross. Yeah, there's no headdress. John Ross owned a plantation. John Ross was wealthy. John Ross grew cotton. John Ross had slaves. He was rich. And so the Cherokees, more than anybody else, were acting as white people could be, and it's not going to matter in the end. And that's sort of the shame of the whole thing. In the end, it doesn't protect them. And the thing that really starts this process and Cherokee trouble with whites neighboring them, especially whites in Georgia, is there will be gold found on Cherokee land. And once gold is discovered there, they'll be under siege almost continuously from neighboring settlers. People from the state of Georgia who will show up, they'll break their fences, they'll steal their cows, they'll dig up their property, they'll just cause trouble. They'll cause trouble. And if you want to talk about assimilating, and you want to talk about, hey, you need to act like white people, instead of going on the war path and attacking whites and doing what, the Cherokees do what most white people would probably do if they got into a land dispute. The Cherokees are going to sue. And they're going to sue and claim that they're independent and that Georgia has no legal power over them. The case will go all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1832, the court will agree that Georgia has no legal power over the Cherokees. The treaties say that the Cherokees are sovereign, and that only the federal government has a say. And so Georgia's actions and Georgia's encroachment on the Cherokees will be deemed illegal. The problem is that the President of the United States, who is the executive whose job is to enforce the law, the President of the United States, Andrew freaking Jackson, and this is one of the real scars on his legacy, Andrew Jackson will refuse to enforce the decision, which I don't know of any other time in American history where the Supreme Court makes a decision and the President of the United States essentially ignores it. Andrew Jackson is going to go as far as to tell the Supreme Court that they want Georgia kept out of Cherokee land and they want the law to be enforced, that the Supreme Court's justices need to go and enforce it themselves, which is just, ludicrousy. I mean, it's blatantly defiant. I can't even imagine the most popular president today telling the Supreme Court that he doesn't care what they think, and that he would refuse to uphold the law and not face impeachment. That doesn't happen to Andrew Jackson, and the reason it doesn't happen to him is simple. Most people agree with him. Most people think the United States would be better off if these Indians were removed. And you have to remember this too. There's a lot of money to be gained by these Indians being pushed off this land. Ultimately Alabama and Mississippi are going to be freed up, parts of Georgia. These people are going to be thrown off. Their lands are going to be taken over by white plantation owners. Those white plantation owners are going to grow cotton, and by 1861, the year that the Civil War starts, there are more millionaires per capita in Alabama and Mississippi than there are anywhere else in the country, which is odd in the fact that today Alabama and Mississippi are two of the poorer countries in the United States. But that just shows you how much money was being generated from cotton and cotton plantations there that are going to sprout up after these Indians are removed. And to go from one extreme in 1860 to being some of the poorest states in the country today just shows you how much those two states and the people living in those states depended on slave labor and cotton for their wealth. And because when it all disappears at the end of the Civil War, and that free labor disappears on them, they're obviously going to be in big trouble. Motion light. But Andrew Jackson's going to ignore their decision because he won't help. The Cherokees will eventually see that Indian removal or removal to Oklahoma is inevitable. And you know, I know John Ross is the principal chief. There will be some other leaders in the Cherokee Nation who are going to splinter off and try to make their own deal with the American people. John Ross, you know, John Ross has kids who are going to school in Harvard and places like that. I mean, just not like the Indian that you think of. John Ross is educated. His kids are educated. He sees the writing on the wall that, you know, if you can't get the President of the United States to enforce the law, that you're essentially out of options. He will, and we'll read something here in a little bit. You know, he's going to send a contingent to Washington D.C. and Jefferson or Jackson's just going to tell these people he can't do anything to help them. And you know, it's odd because when you go back to Fort Mims and the war with the Creeks and Red Eagle, you know, who helped Andrew Jackson defeat the Creeks? It was Cherokees. It's not going to matter. It's just not going to matter. The encroachment from Georgia, the abuse from Georgia, is not going to end. In the spring of 1838, U.S. troops are going to come into Cherokee territory. There is a, I'll look at this real fast. There's a video there's a video in the resource page, which is inside the quarantined history folder, which is inside the Expanding Nation 1 folder. There's a resource sheet in there. There's a real short 2-minute video or so on the Supreme Court ruling that I think is real good that you can watch. And then there's a video on the Trail of Tears in there that you can watch. I'll just tell you, in the spring of 1838, troops are going to come in to Cherokee territory, federal troops with Georgia militia, and they're going to start knocking on doors. And I don't know if you can wrap your head around this or not, but imagine someone knocking on your door 5 minutes from now and telling you it's time to go, and you can take with you what you can carry. And that's really what's going to happen. The worst part of it is that they're not going to take them immediately to Oklahoma. They're just going to round them up. And so imagine someone showing up on your door saying, hey, listen, you got to go. I don't have time for you to pack. You need to leave now. You know, putting what you can in your hands and carrying out the door, and then be led to a general assembly area and sat in the open, which is essentially what's going to be happening. The federal government's going to create giant pens, fences to hold these people in, and essentially they're going to sit there for almost 4 months in the open. I mean, with what they have in their hands when they were told they had to leave their house. I mean, you'll see if you watch, but to be stuck sitting in the open for 4 or 5 months and just waiting to leave to Oklahoma, by the time you're ready to leave, you're so exhausted and so tired and so beat up from sitting in the sun all summer. I mean, how do you make it? And the answer is, for a lot of people, you don't. And the 800 miles, they're going to travel in the fall of that year. In the winter, 1838, 1839, about 25% of the Cherokees are going to be lost on what was known in history today as the Trail of Tears. I guess that's running a little bit long too. It's about 15 minutes. Like I said, there's 3 videos in there. 2 of them, though, on the resource sheet, the Supreme Court one and the Trail of Tears one, are applicable to today. I'll make sure I put that in the update. and we'll see you tomorrow on Wednesday. I got something to read for you. All right, see ya.
Let the year I come to